Building a castle wasn't like putting together a wobbly bookshelf and hoping no one notices the lean. There were no do-overs, no "we'll fix it in post," and definitely no good enough. If you got it wrong, you weren't dealing with a slightly crooked frame. You were risking several tons of stone deciding that gravity looks fun today and choosing your skull as a landing pad. Medieval kings learned this the hard way, usually right after a confident foreman shouted, "That should hold!" Here's the thing. Kings were basically the original property guys. But they weren't out there hunting for good school districts or checking commute times. Picking a site for a castle was a deadly serious game of real-life Monopoly. If you placed that fortress on the wrong square, you didn't just lose rent, you could lose your crown, your army, and a not insignificant portion of your headcount. You couldn't just jab a finger at a map and declare, "Put my castle there." You needed a place that kept you safe, fed, and in control. Think of it like choosing a seat in class. You want a clear view of the room, easy access to the door, and maybe close enough to borrow a pencil when yours mysteriously walks away. Now replace pencil with emergency grain deliveries and rowdy classmates with armed people who really want you to move out. High ground was the medieval penthouse. From up top, you could see trouble coming days before it reached your gate. And attacking uphill? Miserable. Try sprinting a steep slope in full armor with a weapon the size of a fence post, while defenders rain things on you that are either sharp, on fire, or both. I've trudged a hill with just a backpack and felt like the mountain was filing a complaint against me. Imagine doing that while arrows say hi. Water mattered, too, and not only for your afternoon hydration break. Rivers and lakes were nature's moats, turning frontal assaults into soggy, complicated gambles. Plus, clean water kept people alive and semi-pleasant to be around. Nobody wants to live in a stone marvel that smells like a locker room in late July. Some rulers oversaw surprisingly smart water systems, underground cisterns for siege months, channels that fed kitchens and baths, and clever ways to keep wells inside the walls so the enemy couldn't just camp on your faucet and wait you out. Trade routes were the medieval highways. You wanted your fortress plugged into the logistics grid: food, iron, timber, pitch, rope, everything that made the castle run like a castle. If you've seen cities cluster around rail lines and ports today, same story, different millennium. Only swap out your next day deliveries for cartloads of grain and barrels of nails that took weeks to arrive and weren't refundable. Now, sometimes the perfect hill already had a village on it. Awkward. Imagine breaking the news. "Hi everyone. Love what you've done with the cottages. Great thatch work, but the king really likes your hill. Time to pack." It's like when your older sibling claims the best spot on the couch, multiplied by 1,000 and backed by soldiers. There are records of entire communities, hundreds, even 1,000 people being relocated so a foundation trench could happen exactly where their favorite market stall used to be. On bold days, they even moved churches. Picture explaining that memo to the Pope. "Your Holiness, we are not destroying it, merely repositioning." And it wasn't just real estate headaches. The politics were a minefield. Lords owned things, bishops owned other things, and peasants had opinions about both. You had feudal obligations like knots in a rope. Pull one, and half the county yanked back. Picking the wrong site could set off lawsuits, uprisings, or open war. Plenty of castle projects stalled halfway because two powerful neighbours decided the hill also came with bragging rights. Kings did try to soften the blow when they uprooted people. Sometimes they offered new land, tax relief, or jobs. Picture being told, "Your farm is now a guard tower, but how do you feel about a lifetime gig in royal housekeeping?" Not everyone was thrilled, obviously, but a clever ruler knew that turning displaced leaders into well-paid castle officers could convert local anger into loyalty with surprising speed. Smart rulers also thought like publicists. Sites carried symbolism. Build on a battlefield where an ancestor won big. You're not just stacking stones, you're asserting destiny. Choose a hill rumored to be sacred. You're borrowing holiness for your throne's brand. And legends? Oh, absolutely. If locals believed a place was guarded by old spirits or heroes, draping your banner there sent a shiver down the spine before anyone even saw your garrison. Defensive creativity went further than high hill, big moat. Some locations looked terrible on paper: swamps, jagged cliffs, cramped ridges, but hid tactical brilliance. Marshes ruined siege engines. Sheer drops turned ladders into comedy. There are castles boxed on three sides by cliffs, where an attacker's only option was the front gate. the dining table of medieval traps. Work smarter, not harder. Build where nature already did half the job. And yes, a few builders had an eye for the dramatic. Astronomical alignments gave certain halls sunbeams that speared through windows on key days, coronations, feast days, the king's birthday. Did that help in a siege? Not really. Did it make visiting nobles say, "Wow," every time? Never underestimate the tactical value of awe. Once the site was locked, the real nightmare began. Materials. If choosing the hill was chess, getting stone to it was weightlifting. Without trucks, cranes, or decent roads, you were basically persuading the earth to move itself. A medium castle could chew through tens of thousands of tons of stone, and that's before we even talk about timber for scaffolds, roofing, hoardings, and the endless temporary platforms that kept masons from turning into trapeze artists. Where did the stone come from? Wherever the good stuff was, and nearby, was a flexible concept. If the closest quality quarry lay 10 miles away, congratulations. You just opened a medieval trucking company staffed by oxen with opinions. Temporary plank roads got laid and relaid under the weight of each load. Crews patched ruts every few hours, and scheduling had to account for mud, weather, and the local inn deciding the teamsters had earned an extra drink. When possible, builders floated stone on river barges. Water turned weeks into days. No river? Back to the Oxen Express. Timber was its own saga. Castles ate forests. Scaffolding alone could swallow thousands of trees for a large build, and that's before you add roofs, doors, beams, hoists, cranes, and siege season reinforcements. Some regions cut so aggressively that laws sprang up overnight. This grove for ship masts, that one for castle scaffolds, and everything else hands off unless you liked the idea of a very long stay in a very dark room you might have helped build. Labor? Imagine managing a small town of specialists. Master masons were the rock stars literally courted by kings, paid in coin and sometimes in perks that would make an agent blush. Behind them came stonecutters, carpenters, blacksmiths, rope makers, carters, mortar mixers, cooks, teamsters, and the endless line of general labourers who hauled, stacked, braced, tamped, and swept. Each craft had rules and pride. Each believed the others were doing it wrong. Getting them to pull the same direction was like conducting an orchestra where half the instruments are hammers. Even small things mattered. Rope, for example, wasn't small at all. Miles of it ran through pulleys and windlasses every day, lifting blocks the size of bathtubs. Iron tools dulled fast on hard stone, which meant forges hummed non-stop. Nails, clamps, hinges, shear plates, metalwork by the ton vanished into the skeleton of the build before a single banner flew from the walls. And through it all, the clock was ticking. Not a nice Netflix clock. The winter comes early and enemies don't RSVP clock. If a king announced a new fortress, rivals heard it too. That hill you're turning into a statement piece? Someone else is now very interested in proving you picked wrong. Which is why, once the site and supplies came together, everything bent toward the first truly critical milestone. The foundations. Because you can gather enough stone to build a small mountain, but if you stack it on a wobbly scrape of dirt, what you really built is a very expensive landslide. Medieval builders understood that the ground beneath the glory was the difference between centuries of power and very loud afternoon. So they dug, and when they hit rock, they smiled. That, though, is the next chapter. For now, remember, if a castle looks inevitable rising on its perfect hill, that's because someone survived 100 wrong answers to earn one right one. So, you've got your hill, your river curve, your trade roads, and a king who's very pleased with himself. Great. Now comes the bit that turns bold talk into backbreaking reality, getting the stuff. Not the fancy banners, not the velvet chairs, the mountain of raw materials that will quietly devour your treasury and your patience. If site choice was strategy, supply was endurance. And medieval builders were marathoners, not sprinters. Let's talk stone first, because castles are, ultimately, extremely organized piles of rock. The numbers are obscene. A medium-sized fortress could swallow many thousands of tons before anyone carved a single arrow loop. Imagine rebuilding an entire hillside elsewhere, one block at a time, and you've got the vibe. Those blocks weren't dainty decor either. We're talking slabs the weight of cars, hauled day after day by teams of animals with the speed and temperament of, well, stubborn, underpaid oxen. And since the best stone rarely grows where you want a castle, you're now in the freight business. Crews hacked out blocks in quarries miles away, squared them up just enough to travel, then rolled them onto sledges or carts. To keep everything from sinking into mud, road gangs laid down thick planks, temporary wooden highways that needed constant patching. Every trip wore grooves into the route, and every groove trapped water, and every puddle made tomorrow worse. Logistics was less build a road once, and more chase the road as it runs away from you. Where there was a river, builders relaxed just a little. Barges turned weeks of hauling into a few days' float. If current and wind cooperated, stone slid downstream like it wanted to be a wall. But rivers don't always go where kings want, and when they didn't, it was back to the slow grind of hooves and wheels. Teams staged waypoints with hay, spare axles, and barrels of pitch to keep cartwheels from shrieking themselves apart. Meanwhile, someone kept count of whose oxen had blisters. Yes, oxen get blisters. No, they don't file complaints, they just stop moving. Timber came next. And it might surprise you that wood could be as critical as stone. Scaffolding alone drank trees by the hundreds. A skeleton around the skeleton rising level by level so masons could stand anywhere the next course demanded. Add roof frames, floors, hoardings that jutted out over walls for defenders to rain hospitality on attackers, plus cranes, derricks, rollers, wedges, and formwork. And your forest starts looking nervous. Regions wrote emergency rules to stop woodlands from vanishing overnight. This grove reserved for ships, that stand reserved for castle works, and the rest politely asked to remain trees until next season. Poaching timber for your own hearth? Risky. Getting caught could earn you an unpleasant tour of the local dungeon's decor. You'll also need rope miles of it. Thick hemp hawsers for cranes, lighter lines for guiding loads, and endless coils for lashing everything to everything else. Rope makers were the unsung crew chiefs of the build. When a line snapped under a 2-ton block, that wasn't a whoops, that was a catastrophe. So rope got treated like a living thing, dried properly, kept out of rot, inspected, replaced before it failed. The ropery yard, with its long, straight walk, where fibers twisted into strands and strands into cords, was as essential to the site as the forge. Ah yes, the forge. You don't appreciate nails until you need 10,000 of them by Thursday. Blacksmiths kept the heartbeat of the project steady. Chisels re-edged, axes reborn after every day's abuse, iron cramps and clamps to hold stones in precise alignment, hinges for shutters, brackets for beams, hoops for barrels, rings for cranes. Iron was precious enough that broken tools weren't thrown away. They were reborn as something smaller and just as necessary. Nothing left the workyard unless it had one more job in it. And then there were the people, a small city in rough clothes. Master masons set out the geometry, the lines and levels, the curves that would later read as effortless strength. Beneath them, stonecutters reduced boulders to obedient blocks. Carpenters coaxed timber into scaffolds and cranes. Carters cursed mud. Labourers carried everything the last, exhausting yards. Cooks fed the lot. A clerk wrote it all down with a quill that never got a day off. Wages varied by skill. So did opinions about who deserved more. If you've ever seen two trades argue about whose work makes the other possible, you already know the soundtrack. All of this, the stone, the wood, the iron, the rope, the sweat funnels to one make-or-break moment. The foundation. Because stacking thousands of tons of ambition onto soil you don't fully understand is how you invent future archaeology. The medieval answer was simple, if not easy. Dig until the ground stops lying to you. So they dug. Trenches followed the castle's outline like chalk on a giant's table. Picks chewed clay, shovels tossed spoil, sledges dragged it away. When the trench found something that didn't move bedrock, dense gravel, a layer that rang when struck, everyone breathed easier. If it didn't, the trench went deeper. Some sites demanded foundations that vanished scary far into the earth, and that labour became invisible the moment stone rose above the grass. But it's the hidden work that keeps the visible from becoming a lesson in hubris. Into those trenches went the castle's quiet genius, a mix of lime, sand, and water called mortar. Lime mortar cured slowly, breathing with the seasons, binding stone without turning brittle. Crews slaked lime in pits, an alchemy of heat and fizz, then mixed to the consistency of heavy cream. They knew, by hand and eye, when it would grip. And while legends claim all sorts of wild additives, blood, egg whites, beer, the real wizardry was in the ratios and the patience. Mortar doesn't care about your schedule. It cures on its own clock. Foundation courses often stepped outward as they descended, like inverted pyramids hiding in the ground. Those steps spread the load, the castle's weight pressing down into a wider footprint so walls above could soar without shearing. It's deceptively elegant. No machinery, just geometry, gravity, and experience. Rubble went into the core. Not as trash, but as texture. An interlocked matrix of small stone and mortar that gripped the larger blocks like a clenched fist. Alignment mattered obsessively. Crews stretched chords, plumbed with weighted lines, and checked levels with water-filled troughs. A few inches of error over 100 feet could spell headaches 10 years later, or worse, next winter. Work happened at chosen hours. Early morning before heat made mortar sulk, late afternoon after sun's tantrums calmed. In cold months, fresh work wore straw blankets, and masons cursed frost like it was a rival foreman. You also see the human fingerprints literally in the foundation record. Tucked into footings, archaeologists sometimes find coins, tiny charms, a saint's token pressed into wet mortar, a whispered hope that the building would stand, and the men would live to see it finished. A cracked hammerhead, inadvertently embedded, becomes a story. A print of a child's hand, someone's son or daughter visiting the site for an hour, turns into a time capsule that nobody planned. The goal, always, was continuity. Once a section started, crews aimed to lay it in one breath, rotating shifts so joints didn't become seams of weakness. Imagine a relay where each runner carries a stone instead of a baton. Shouts coordinated hoists. Whistle calls said up, down, hold, and the foreman's eye stitched 100 separate actions into one steady rise. When darkness fell, torches smoked, and the lime pits glowed faintly in the night like the earth had a forge of its own. Then came the test. Rain, wind, the first settling. Foundations talk to builders if you know how to listen. Hairline cracks that go nowhere? Normal. A corner that sinks a thumb's breadth? Concerning, but fixable. A rumble that makes men put down tools and look at each other? Everyone back out, brace, rethink. Medieval crews knew how to stop, how to shore, how to let the ground finish moving before asking it to carry more. That restraint is part of why so many of their choices are still standing. When the trench brimmed with purpose and the first course is cured, someone finally got to say the words everyone wanted to hear. Bring up the wallstone. That's when a site takes a breath and changes shape. The castle stops being a rumour in the dirt and becomes a horizon line. Cranes get busier. Scaffolds bloom like wooden ribs. The geometry that lived on a parchment grid now throws shadows at noon. From here, it becomes a choreography. Outer faces of carefully dressed ashlar that lock tight enough to make knives sulk. A hungry core of rubble and mortar that drinks every chip and offcut. Through stones that stitch the whole thickness like dowels. Corners so precisely bonded that they look carved from a single block. And above all, rhythm lift, set, tap, check, smear, step, repeat, until a course turns into a wall, and a wall turns into a statement. But before we climb the stairs and talk about arrow loops, slopes, secret passages, and the windlasses that made hamsters out of grown men, let's savour the quiet victory of that first real rise. Because the difference between a dream and a fortress is measured in trenches nobody will ever see, lime that cures in silence, and the stubbornness to keep stacking until gravity agrees to cooperate. Here's where the outline in the dirt turns into a skyline. Walls. Not garden walls, not nice little boundaries to keep the goats from the cabbages, but vertical geology, deliberate cliffs that make attackers rethink life choices. Building them wasn't just piling stone higher. It was a conversation with gravity, weather, and the long memory of rock. The rhythm kicks in the moment the foreman calls for wallstone. Carters heave up with carts stacked like grey bread loaves. Masons step onto scaffolds, palms white with lime. And the windlass crews, those human hamsters, start walking inside giant timber wheels that creak like ship hulls, raising blocks to the next lift. The wheel turns, the rope sings, and 1,000-pound stone floats as if it had a vote. Walls grew like a layer cake whose recipe every veteran could recite in their bones. First, the faces. Carefully dressed ashlar blocks on the outside, set with crisp arises that meet so cleanly you could run a knife along the seam and feel it sulk. These face stones aren't just pretty. They lock the geometry, make the wall shed water, and tell climbers good luck. Behind them, things get deliberately messy. A core of small stone and mortar called the hearting or rubble fill. Chips from cutting, odd shapes from the quarry, offcuts that would otherwise be waste, all of it becomes texture. Mortar flows around it, nestling each piece until the whole thing behaves like a single mass. Through stones, the heroes hidden in the middle tie the wall's two faces across the core. Set at intervals, they stitch the thickness together like the pegs in a timber frame. Without them, faces could bulge outward, a slow-motion disaster. With them, the wall is one stubborn slab. Corners are a craftsperson's ego trip, the coin stones. These often come from particularly tough, dense stone, squared and polished, to a standard that borders on rude. Every coin is a promise. This edge will not wander. Masons lay them with such precision that entire corners read as if they were carved from a single block. When you see a starched, unyielding corner on an old ruin, remember there's a chain of names, some known, many not under every hammer blow that made that right angle truthful. You'll notice something else if you squint. The wall is not perfectly vertical. It leans in battered, as builders say, wider at the base and slimmer near the parapet. That subtle slope does a lot of quiet work. It sheds falling stones outward onto attackers, reduces overturning forces, and persuades the whole mass to keep hugging its foundations. It also messes with ladders, which prefer straight targets. A good batter means a lot of dropped ladders and bruised egos. Openings are where walls stop being brute strength and turn sly. Arrow loops, little slits from the outside, cozy wedges from within let defenders cover a surprising arc. Inside, the embrasure flares so an archer can swing a bow left and right while presenting only a knife's edge to return fire. Sometimes you see cross-shaped loops, a vertical slit for elevation, a horizontal for sweeping. It looks decorative. It's pure function. Windows for living spaces stay small at first. Glass is precious. Shutters leak, but even the tiny ones have deep, splayed sides that bounce scant light farther into rooms. Later, as confidence and wealth grow, you'll see larger openings with tracery and coloured glass, especially in halls and chapels. But in the hard early days, light comes as a ration, not a feast. Rising with the wall is a forest of scaffolding timber poles threaded through the masonry via putlog holes. Those little square voids you see on old castle faces aren't decay. They're the ghost handles of the build. As courses climb, the crew shifts planks, ties new poles, and keeps the working deck just below the fresh lift. Putlog holes get filled later or left as handy access points for repairs, a medieval maintenance port built into the facade. Now about those cranes. Windlasses and tread wheels made humans into counterweights. 2 or 3 workers tramp the internal treads like monks on an endless pilgrimage, and up comes the block, guided by taglines, swung onto bedding mortar with a thud that you feel in your molars if you're standing on the same scaffold. The setter taps it true, a soft mallet for coaxing, an iron one for asserting. Down a hair, good, hold. Mortar squeezes, the joint beds, the line stays tight. Heat complicates everything. Mortar doesn't like to set too fast or too slow. So work days become dance steps. Lay courses in the cool of morning, break when the sun bullies, resume when shadows lengthen. In brutal summers, crews will torchlight the night shift, and the tread wheel will hum under the moon. In winter, fresh joints get tucked under straw cloaks against frostbite. The wall is a living patient, and the site becomes a hospital ward of severity and care. If you peel back time, you'll find signatures in the stonemason's marks, little stars, anchors, runes, cats, dragons, initials. They aren't graffiti, they're invoices and pride. Marks say, "I laid this," for tallying pay and for legacy. Over years you can track a mason's career across courses, towers, and even different castles, a breadcrumb trail of skill chipped into the fortress's skin. Secret is a strong word, but walls often keep confidences. Within their thickness, narrow passages, murage corridors let messengers bypass the crush of a courtyard, guards shift positions unseen, or a lord slip from hall to chapel sheltered from rain and arrows alike. Some stretches hide small listening nooks near the gate, acoustic traps where a guard can eavesdrop on visitors cooling their heels below. The wall, in other words, doesn't only repel, it also whispers. Water, the eternal schemer, demands respect. Drip edges and string courses shed runoff. Weep holes in parapets relieve standing pools. Flashings of lead, an expensive gift from the smithy seal where timber roofs bite into masonry. If water finds a way, frost will pry it wider. One winter of neglect can undo 50 perfect lifts. So the clerk's books start listing lead by the hundredweight, oak shingles by the 1,000, tar by the barrel, because dryness is defense. As height grows, so does caution. Loads concentrate on corners and around openings. Settlements differ. Scaffolds sway just enough to remind everyone how much air sits between their boots and breakfast. Foremen pace with plumb bob and level, testing paranoia into habit. If a course runs proud, it gets dressed. If a line sags, it gets corrected now, not later. Later is how cracks write their arguments across your stone in winter. At intervals, through the rising mass, masons seed long ties of timber bonding beams to knit the work while mortar cures. These aren't permanent, they'll rot out in years. But while the wall is still finding its confidence, the ties tame unequal movement. Think of them as friendly splints the wall will one day no longer need. Then there's the parapet, notched with merlons, the solid teeth and crenels, the gaps. The crown everyone recognizes. When hoardings go up, temporary timber galleries projecting on brackets, defenders can drop anything from rocks to, we'd rather not say, straight down the face, safe behind a wood screen. Later, many castles replace hoardings with stone machicolations, those handsome stone balconies with open floors that make attackers discover new feelings about roofs. If you're listening for music, a good wall build has it. The rasp of a chisel finding plane, the hollow ring of a block set true, the soft purr of mortar spread to just the right thickness, the treadwheel's heartbeat, the foreman's whistle cutting through chatter. It's a score that says progress. And every lift you can see from the fields makes rivals elsewhere nervous. A castle at waist height is a rumour. At shoulder height, a promise. Above a man's reach, it becomes intent. Of course, a wall is not a castle. It's the beginning of a perimeter that needs teeth towers and a brain the gatehouse. Towers give height, angles of fire, and the psychological "we're taller than you" that never stops working. The gatehouse is where visitors become problems if they brought the wrong attitude. But before we swing to those showpieces, appreciate the patient audacity of these rising planes. They were made by hands, backs, and a geometry you can feel with your fingertips, weight transferred, thrust managed, rain told where to go, and time asked politely to look elsewhere. And when the day's last stone beds and the trowel's final smear feathers into nothing, workers climb down, the wheels stop, the ropes slacken, and the wall stands alone in the dusk new shadow where there was none yesterday. Quietly taller, quietly truer, quietly promising that tomorrow the horizon will move again. Walls give you a line, towers give you leverage. And the gatehouse? That's the castle's brainstem where everything vital passes through, and where reflexes decide who lives to brag about their day. Once the curtain walls reach a respectable height, builders turn to the structures that make those walls do more than just look intimidating. Start with towers. Early on, you'll see plenty of square ones because they're simpler to build: straight lines, right angles, tidy courses. But stone has opinions, and siege engines have a mean streak. A square tower's corners are weak points. Batter them with rams or stones, and fractures love to chase along those clean angles like lightning down a church spire. The shift to round towers wasn't aesthetic fussiness. It was physics. Curves spread impact, deflect missiles, and deny attackers a cozy dead zone to huddle in at the base. Walk the ring wall, and you'll notice the arc. Every spot outside is in someone's line of fire. No corner to hide behind, no blind nook for a sapper to quietly chip away at the foundation while whistling. Round doesn't always mean pure circle. You get D-shaped towers, flat side inward, curve outside because interior space needs straight walls to behave. Inside, floors stacked like a spiral sandwich, storage at ground level, barracks or guard rooms above, and, crowning the structure, a roof platform or fighting deck with a waist-high parapet that keeps your defenders safe while they share their feelings with anyone foolish enough to approach. You'll see timber hoardings appear during war season, temporary balconies bristling from the parapet, pierced underneath so gravity can lend a hand with stones, bolts, and boiling encouragement. Later builds tend to replace those with stone machicolations, permanent overhangs that do the same job without worrying the carpenter. And stairs, let's talk about those deliciously unfair spiral stairs. Almost without exception, they twist clockwise as they rise. If you're defending, coming down the curve, your right sword, hand has room to swing. If you're attacking upward, the central newel pillar cramps your right arm tight to your body. Advantage: defender. Add in uneven rises, some steps a thumb's breadth taller, some narrower, and you've staged a slapstick routine where only one side knows the choreography. In the dim light, with the clatter, steam of breath, and shield-knocking stone, a single awkward step can turn a push into a pile-up. Medieval builders didn't just sculpt space, they choreographed failure. Towers aren't merely platforms. They're junction boxes for movement places where the wall walk widens, where a door lets you slip inside the thickness of the curtain to find a hidden passage, where a stair spirals down to a postern gate, a small secret door near the water, or a ravine for messengers and sudden sorties. Some towers keep a well or a cistern, because an elevated guard post that runs out of water is a guard post that stops guarding. Others tuck a tiny chapel under the roofline, a reminder that while you prepare to meet your enemies, you'd best also prepare to meet your maker. Now, swing around to the gatehouse, the architectural equivalent of "come at me, bro." If a castle has a headline feature besides the keep, this is it. The gatehouse is deliberately overbuilt, more fortress than foyer. Think of it as a hallway designed by someone who hates hallways. First, the approach. You don't stroll straight in on a nice flat road. The path kinks, climbs, squeezes anything to break momentum and wedge siege towers. If the castle sits by water, the entrance might be across a narrow causeway. If it's inland, a deep ditch or dry moat does the same job. Either way, a drawbridge rides on iron pivots and thick chains, or winch ropes. When raised, the bridge becomes an armoured plug, sometimes studded with iron plates that make fire laugh and go somewhere else. Step gingerly onto the bridge, and you meet the first portcullis, a gridded iron and oak slab that drops in a heartbeat. Behind it waits the gate passage, a tunnel through the gatehouse lined with arrow loops on both sides, sometimes at 2 levels. Above you, murder holes. They're exactly as friendly as they sound. Rocks, bolts, boiling water, hot sand, which flows into armor joints like malicious hourglass grit. Quicklime creative defenders treat gravity as a menu. Many gatehouses nest portcullises like shark teeth. Drop the front one to trap attackers under the holes, then drop a second behind them to create the classic killing box. If the passage kinks, attackers have to turn shields awkwardly, while defenders remain comfortable. Some entrances even fake you out with a dummy gate, an inviting arch that dead ends in a kill zone, while the true entrance lies around a bend. Medieval UX is unforgiving. On a busy day, the gatehouse also does perfectly ordinary things. It weighs carts of wheat, tallies, sheep hooves, checks, trade goods, collects tolls. The constable's clerk sits in a side chamber with a ledger that never stops gaining pages, counting every sack and spear. There's usually a guardroom with a brazier, a rack of spare weapons, a horn for signals, and the day's orders chalked on a plank. Above, in the room controlling the portcullis windlass, muscles do paperwork of their own. Counterweights help, but it still takes coordinated men on cranks to raise a gate in moments. You'll see grooves in the side walls where the portcullis teeth have rasped for years, polished by urgency. Chains creak, a drum beats the tempo, and the grate slides up like a steel eyelid. Beyond the inner portcullis, thick timber doors swing on strap, hinges heavy enough to make a blacksmith smug. They're often backed with iron, studded to resist axes, and crossbarred with beams that lock into sockets, 1 beam per breadth of the door, because redundancy is dignity when someone outside is shouting with a ram. Many gatehouses add an outer defensive bubble called a barbican, a small walled court or forward outwork that forces visitors into a supervised waiting room before they're allowed near the main entrance. If trouble starts there, defenders can shut the inner gate and turn the barbican into a trap. Look up at the gatehouse towers flanking the passage. They're not decorative parentheses. From their fighting decks, you get plunging fire straight into the approach. Archers, crossbowmen, and later, handgunners can keep a steady rain of disapproval on anything trying to fill the ditch or set ladders. If an enemy drags up a siege tower, the towers answer with hooks, fire, and bolts aimed to kill the thing's wheels or crew. If sappers try to undermine the wall, defenders listen through sounding rods, long poles pressed to the stone and to the ear, hoping to catch the faint chew of pick on earth. Hear it? Countermine. Dig fast, brace your roof, and be ready for a fight by lamplight where the floor is clay and the air is sharp with lime. Inside, the gatehouse doubles as a command center. Trumpet calls and horn signals carry pre-arranged meanings. Close the west postern, archers front, drawbridge up. Flags on poles echo the orders when wind or chaos swallows sound. Runners use those tight wall passages to spread messages faster than any horse can gallop in a cramped yard. A good constable stands where his voice can split. A better one stands where he can see the white of his own men's knuckles and knows when to swap a tired squad off the wall before they make mistakes. Everything about the towers and the gatehouse is layered defense redundancy in 3 dimensions. If a tower falls, the wall walk behind it has a choke point ready with a door that slab slams shut. If the first portcullis breaks, the second lowers. If both fail, the doors bar. If the doors burn, the inner courtyard still forces attackers to cross open ground under flanking fire. And if the courtyard falls, there's always the keep, the final redoubt thicker, darker, meaner than any other building on site. One more thing the stones won't tell you. These structures also play your mind. A long approach makes you feel small before you're even within bowshot. A portcullis that drops with a roar tells visitors, friendly and otherwise, that the castle breathes and decides. The spiral stare that squeezes your sword arm whispers that the place knows your habits better than you do. The high fighting deck where wind snaps banners says, "We see farther." Architecture here is strategy carved into silhouette. By the time the gatehouse runs like a machine bridge, smooth, grates quick, signals crisp, you've turned a ring of walls into a weapon. The castle can now say no with force, and yes with conditions. Which is exactly when the masons turn their attention to the heart of the matter, the keep. Not a decoration, not a vanity project, but the last place standing when everything else is embers. It's where authority sleeps, where supplies huddle, where the well goes deep, and where the final door closes while the world outside argues with itself. If the walls and towers are the castle's muscles, the keep is its marrow dense, vital, stubborn. It isn't just the biggest building because kings liked bragging rights, though let's be honest, that helped. The keep is the fallback plan carved into stone, the final absolutely not after every other no has been tested. When masons shift to the keep, the site's mood changes. The work becomes slower, heavier, more exacting. You can fix a courtyard house. You don't fix a keep you get it right the first time, or you inherit a problem large enough to cast a literal shadow. Step back and look at the footprint. Early keeps often stand as simple, monumental rectangles, great towers, with walls so thick they seem to be hoarding distance. Later you'll see polygonal plans and even rounded keeps, but the principle doesn't budge. Mass, layered purpose, and interior logic that keeps people alive when everything else has gone wrong. The entrance is rarely at ground level. You're meant to climb to it. A timber stair or stone forebuilding that forces visitors into a narrow, supervised path. Easy to burn, easy to block, easy to defend. Reach the door, and you meet not a welcoming foyer, but a short, angled passage, where a portcullis or stout door can trap you between 2 different kinds of regret. Inside, the story divides by floors, each level a different answer to the same question. How do we endure? The lowest levels are storage, a belly full of barrels and sacks, grain in bins with rat-stopping collars, salted meat in casks, cheese in cool niches. Pitch and lamp oil are kept apart from the food like feuding relatives at a wedding. Hooks hang from beams to keep sacks off damp floors, and a clerk counts everything with priestly patience. If the castle expects trouble, crews rotate stores. Fresh in, old out, the rhythm of siege. Proof living. Find the well. The well is the keep's heartbeat. Sometimes it's a natural spring the builders lucked into. Sometimes it's a shaft driven down like a statement of faith. Lining stones are tight as clenched teeth, the curb stout enough to lean a whole man's weight against. You can lose walls and still fight. Lose water, and your timeline shrinks to hours. Cisterns join the well's work, catching rain off leaded roofs via hidden runs, gravity's surplus stashed in underground stone bellies. The masons line those cisterns with a waterproof render and a pride that reads like a warranty in lime. Climb 1 level, and the keep starts talking politics. The great hall spreads out under a timber roof, its smoke-burnished ribs arching like an overturned ship. Along one long wall, a deep fireplace turns fuel into morale. Stone benches, trestle tables, banners that once hung only on feast days now live here full-time during a siege. Ceremony wears chainmail and calls itself routine. The Lord sits at the high table, with a view of the door and the hall. But don't imagine endless banquets. Siege rations turn flavor into memory. What the hall offers is heat, light, and the illusion that hierarchy remains when the horizon says otherwise. Look at the windows. Small, splayed inward, deeply embrasured. In peace, they drink what daylight they can. In war, they behave like arrow loops with opinions, bending sightlines where defenders need them. You might see shutters clad with iron to make fire shrug and go lie down elsewhere. As wealth grows, glass sometimes appears panes set in lead, precious, removable. Some nobles literally travelled with their windows. But a keep's windows always remember the project's thesis. Survive first, admire later. Follow the stair, the tight, clockwise spiral, threaded into the corner thickness. It stutters occasionally. A step a hair higher here, a narrower tread there. You see the trick now. We've walked it in towers. On these stairs, an invader's sword arm stays crimped. A defender's swing has room to argue. Arrow slits appear at landings for the unpleasant surprise you keep in case guests forget their manners. And a simple pivot in the stair makes the difference between we fall back and we fall. A door at a mid-landing can turn a flight of steps into a wall with ideas. Up again, and chambers split public from private. A solar for the Lord's family where the wind doesn't scold quite as loudly. A chapel tucked in a thickness of wall, its lancet window snipping a blade of light onto a carved stone ledge. Here, the architecture turns tender for a moment, capitals with vines. A small piscina for washing liturgical vessels. A painted cross, now flaking but stubborn. It's not decoration for its own sake. In the longest nights, people need a reason to keep the next candle trimmed. Follow your nose and you'll meet the garderobes. Chutes in the wall where gravity does sanitation's early work. They vent outside, sometimes into a pit in the ditch where unlucky labourers, paid extra and probably hammered, periodically stir fate with shovels. Channels in the stone slope just enough, and air flues near the chutes drag smell the right direction if the wind cooperates. You can infer a keep's wealth by how many garderobes it spares. Privacy is a status symbol that starts smelling like public health policy once the garrison doubles. Air is half the battle. Thick walls can hoard cold as well as safety. Clever masons knit flues into thickness so that heat from the hearth below slips upward along hidden runs, shaving the chill from the room above. They're not central heating in any modern sense, but they temper the worst of winter's rudeness. In summer, narrow windows on opposite sides of a chamber can make a pressure difference the breeze understands. Add shutters you can angle, and you've got primitive HVAC that costs less than a second chimney and never writes angry letters about overtime. Listen to sound. The keep is an instrument. Thick floors dull panic. Stairwells carry commands like trumpets. A horn blast from the parapet finds the hall. A runner's footfalls telegraph priorities. Some keeps add wooden communication pipes, hollow posts between floors like nervous system ports, though a good shout is often faster than a drafty invention. The constable learns where to stand, so that one sentence divides into 3 orders without repeating itself. Security isn't only about more wall, it's about intentional complication. Doors that dogleg, short corridors that end in darkness but hide a sally port, an exit into a trench, or the hollow behind an outwork. These tunnels let a squad boil out of safety and onto an enemy flank, knives out, then vanish where pursuit meets a blank stone question. Some sally ports are honest, others are traps. Decoy tunnels that flood, dead end, or bring attackers into a crossfire a defender could diagram with a smile. Inventory the roof. The fighting platform up top is not just for a banner and heroic silhouettes at sunset. Parapets notch with crenels the gaps you shoot through and merlons the teeth that keep you alive. Wall walks run people around corners faster than shouting can, and a hoarding timber gallery temporarily hooked across the parapet turns gravity into a weaponized concierge. Later, machicolations make that overhang permanent in carved stone, their undersides open like the mouths of very judgmental gargoyles. What do you hear when it's all running? The draw of a windlass at the stairhead, hauling up a weighted basket of stones to the parapet. The clunk of a portcullis ratchet. The steady, Accountant's rustle of the clerk in the undercroft, counting out salted fish for a week. A hammer setting a hinge pin. The mutter of prayer in the chapel. The cheerful profanity of a carpenter arguing with a green beam that refuses to be a brace. The keep is a machine with a soul. Each part's noise means the others can relax for 5 minutes and drink water. And yet, in the midst of all this functional stubbornness, there's theatre. The keep skyline says, "We endure," to friends, and "Don't try it," to enemies. Its door on the second level makes a point before you've climbed it. To speak here, you must first accept being at a tactical disadvantage. Its hall tells the garrison that order remains, that the Lord still eats last when the bread is short, that justice, however defined today, will be attempted in front of witnesses. When the keep is ready, stores deep, well true, stairs unfair, doors cruel, chapel gentle, you've built a fortress inside a fortress, a place that expects to be the last light on for miles. But stone and systems are only half the math. A castle is not a home until people can live in it without losing their minds. Heating, water runs, candle budgets, glass, if you can afford it, kitchens that won't choke the hall with smoke, to laundries that don't turn the well sour. These are the domestic sieges that run every day. And behind them all, the garrison, the tired, loud, essential engine that makes walls and keep worth their stone needs, feeding, drilling, and a reason to stand one more watch when the rain pulls at their cloaks. That's where we're headed next. Taking the cold geometry we've raised and making it habitable, then manning it with enough skill and nerve that the castle becomes more than a boast in the landscape. Because impressive as a keep is, it's only the stage. The player's people. Stone can promise safety, but it doesn't promise comfort. Turning a fortress into a place where people can sleep, work, and not mutiny every winter, that's the unglamorous heroism of medieval domestic engineering. After the keep stands stubborn and the gatehouse growls, crews pivot to the 1,000 quiet systems that make a castle livable enough that nobody throws the Lord off the wall by February. Start with heat. A castle is basically a granite icebox that leaks on windy days. The solution isn't one dainty hearth. It's a campaign of fireplaces, broad, deep, and hungry. The Great Hall gets the grand one, a mouth big enough to swallow half a tree, and still ask what's for dessert. Smoke is persuaded up hooded chimneys lined with stone and later brick. Damp logs sulk, good oak sings. Fuel becomes policy. Stewards mark coppices for rotational cutting, tally cords by the season, and guard the woodyard like it's a treasury, because in winter, it is. In better-funded keeps, masons thread narrow flues inside the wall thickness, so heat from a lower hearth sneaks upward and takes the edge off the chill above. You won't mistake it for central heating, but that 10 degrees is the difference between miserable and bearable. Fire loves air, so windows and shutters become an art of balance. Early on, its stout wood shutters open them, and you light the room but invite the sky to file a temperature complaint. Close them, and you get warmth and darkness in equal measure. As fortunes rise, glass panes arrive. Small, wavy, leaded like a puzzle, expensive enough that nobles sometimes travel with their favourite windows crated up like sacred relics. A glazier becomes as prized as a good cook, because a room that's warm and lit feels like a promise kept. Lighting is logistics. Candles, rushlights, oil lamps, each with a supply chain and a personality. Beeswax candles burn clean and bright, so chapels and the Lord's table demand them. Tallow smokes and smells, but it's cheap and keeps corridors honest. The chandler counts wicks like a quartermaster counts arrows. There's a season's rhythm to it. In long nights, rationing grows strict, and every snuffed flame is a small victory for stored supplies. Iron brackets stud the walls in corridors. Portable candlesticks migrate with people like friendly fireflies. Someone is always trimming wicks, scraping drips, and cursing drafts. Water is the stubborn half of comfort. The well in the keep is your insurance policy. Everything else is convenience layered onto it. Rain is commandeered from roof slopes by lead gutters that feed cisterns lined with waterproof render. Carriers, boys, men, women, depending on the castle, shoulder buckets up tight stairs until their calves write poems about it. A few rich places add a simple lift. A rope and pulley with a big leather bucket. A windlass at the head of the stair. A rhythm that turns weight into water with far fewer curses. Kitchens and brew houses want water by the barrel, and laundry wants more than any sane person would promise. So outbuildings cluster where splash and steam won't crawl back into the hall. Some castles tuck a tank in an upper chamber, and let gravity pretend to be plumbing. Lift in the morning, draw all day. Waste goes the other way by design. Garderobes, latrines threaded through walls empty into pits, streams, or the ditch beyond the curtain. Their chutes taper, so the worst of humanity's byproducts slide away from the living. Vent slits near the tops pull air upward if the wind cooperates. A skilled mason can root a draft like a shepherd sorts sheep. Down in the moat or pit, the gong farmers do a job that earns danger pay and a stiff drink. A wise steward keeps their wages current and their complaints private, because few jobs can sabotage morale faster than sanitation left to neglect. Food is comfort's chorus. Kitchens fire from before dawn to whenever the last guard finishes his bowl. The room itself is designed to survive being on fire. Stone vaults, wide chimneys, a floor that expects abuse. Smoke finds its lane up the flues, or it doesn't, and then the cooks send smoke elsewhere with bellows and bad language. Hearths divide labour, one for boiling, one for roasting, one for bread ovens, whose bellies hold heat like a grudge. Hooks hang from chimney bars for cauldrons. Spits turn with the help of boys, cranks, or occasionally a small treadmill that makes a dog reconsider its career path. The buttery and pantry sit adjacent, parcelled by purpose. Ale here, flour there. Salted meat under lock and tally. A cellarer's chalk marks creep across casks like constellations of restraint. Preservation is not optional. It's the only way you get to spring without hating past you. Salting, smoking, drying, pickling, all the verbs of patience. North-facing stores keep cool. Thick walls buffer swings in temperature. Barrels stay off stone floors on cribbing to dodge damp. Grain bins get collars that rats find insulting. Cats get names and salaries paid in affection and leftovers. In good weeks, there's fresh. A pig from the outer bailey's pen, greens from the kitchen garden tucked into a sunny corner, fish if you're lucky enough to border a river and smart enough to build a postern to it. In tight months, porridge and peas pudding become a religion everyone suddenly believes in. Bathing is an event. A wooden tub drags into a warm chamber. The floor gets layered with rushes or mats, and servants parade buckets of hot water from the kitchen. Scented herbs tossed in are not decadence. They are diplomacy with smell. Ranking folks soak. Everyone else loves a steam by the laundry sheds when the schedule and weather say yes. In a few castles, a dedicated bathhouse warms stones and splashes like a treat. The medieval spa day, though, by modern standards you'd still call it bracing. Linen and clothing keep bodies happy and walls cleaner than straw alone can manage. Rushes on floors get changed seasonally. And the fashion for mixing in fragrant herbs isn't just for show, it's a long, slow attempt to remind noses that life is worth living. Laundresses run a sharp business. Lye for whitening, ash for scrubbing, cold rinse, and a rope between towers to turn wind into a drying maid. In winter, lines crisscross the undercroft like spiderwebs that smell faintly of soap and smoke. Sound management is comfort too. Tapestries aren't just for scenes of hunting and boast. Hangings quiet a hall, softened draughts that slide through imperfect joins, and turn a room from echoing stone to something like a hug. Carpentry adds floors on joists that flex a bit, warmer than bare masonry, forgiving enough that a dropped ladle isn't a heraldic announcement. Doors get proper latches. Thresholds get ramps where carts bump through. The gatehouse clerk finally stops finding splinters in his ink. The people who keep it all moving form a choreography that never quite stops. Cooks and scullions, carters and farriers, smiths and coopers, the steward who balances wants against winter, the reeve who checks the garden, the marshal who says which horse eats what. A castle is a company town where the company is survival. Rituals anchor morale. The bell for dawn, the horn for curfew, the mass in the chapel on feast days, the shared loaf after a long repair. Even small festivals matter, saints' days where the ale is a bit better, a spring fair in the outer bailey where your coin buys a ribbon and an hour without thinking about garrison rosters. Communication knits comfort to control. Boards in the gatehouse list the week's work. Hay cutting, ditch scouring, the day the mason wants quiet because a keystone is going in and he needs to hear the stone's argument. Trumpet calls have meanings. Flags on the tower repeat them when fog steals sound. Runners know which stairs snarl and which stairs glide. The constable's voice carries in places designed for it. That's not luck. That's long practice and stones that learned your orders. All these domestic systems intersect with defense like gears. A well-placed kitchen door becomes a sally port in a pinch. A water tank above a stair turns into an impromptu deluge if fire says hello to the gatehouse door. The laundry yard, usually a social hub of steam and gossip, becomes a triage station during a fight. The steward's ledger, dull as dirt on quiet days, becomes a survival map. How many candles left? How many barrels drinkable? How many days until you start pretending to like barley more than you actually do? And yes, comfort is also politics. A warm hall says the Lord cares. Fresh rushes say someone respects labour. Candles in the chapel after a hard week say meaning matters. Competence keeps tempers low, and low tempers keep blades sheathed. The domestic isn't separate from the military. It's the reason the military can stand their watch without inventing reasons to be somewhere else. Once those systems hum fires steady, water steady, light steady, you can staff the walls with people who aren't exhausted by the basics. Which brings us to the garrison, the living engine of the place. Drill, duty, rations, boredom, fear, pride, the human math that decides whether your beautiful defences are a stage set or a real problem for anyone marching toward your gate. A castle without a garrison is just an expensive landmark. The moment domestic systems stop tripping over themselves, the constable turns the volume up on the real reason all this stone exists. People with drills, schedules, and pointy objects. Welcome to the daily grind that turns walls into willpower. Roll call starts early, too early, if you ask anyone who was cozy by a brazier at dawn. The yard fills with boots scuffing frost, breath-making little ghosts. Names get shouted, and the clerk with the tidy script notes who's present, who's sick, who misplaced themselves at the alehouse. A garrison is a sampler pack. Men-at-arms in hauberks and kettle helmets. Archers with the longbows, hunched shoulders and big hands. Crossbowmen who carry their weapon like a small, stubborn animal. A few spearmen, cheap, reliable, unglamorous, and specialists with jobs so niche they sound made up until you see them work. Training is daily because rust is patient. Archers loose into butts on the far side of the bailey, the thrum of strings counting time like a drumline. Longbows demand respect. Draw weights that make new recruits' faces turn interesting colours, and a habit of reshaping bodies over years, right arms roped with muscle, spines that tilt. Fletchers hover near, a little possessive about their shafts. If you step on a finished arrow, you'll meet a vocabulary lesson. Bowstrings are babied, waxed, kept dry, warmed under a cloak before shooting in winter. A snapped string at the wrong moment is more than embarrassing. It's expensive, and it costs seconds you don't have. Crossbow crews drill slower, but hit like a verdict. Wind, set, notch, level, then the decisive thunk that makes shield boards think about retirement. They're good for holding a line, good for teaching a reckless raider humility, and good for garrison duty because you can put a newcomer behind one with fewer months of training. The church may frown, the wall approves. Men-at-arms spar in pairs, blunted edges, real weight. You hear the ring of steel on steel, then the dull, low note of wood weapons on padded practice gear. Footwork matters more than biceps. A smart step wins before a flashy swing even gets an opinion. The marshal walks the line, correcting stances with 2 words. Shorter steps. He's been saying it for 20 years, and will say it for 20 more. Nearby, a buckler circle plays out like chess at full speed, small shields, quick blades, wrists talking in flicks and parries. Up on the wall walk, the drill turns into choreography. Teams hustle from crenel to crenel, learning lanes of fire like they're memorizing a hymn. A signaller sends pre-arranged calls. 1 note to the postern, 2 to the gatehouse, 3 eyes on the river. Flags echo when wind eats sound. Every archer learns their sectors, every crossbowman their reload rhythm, every runner the short paths that shave seconds between tower and tower. Seconds are strategy, then logistics, the dull glory behind the glamour. A castle's arrow appetite during a fight is rude hundreds per hour when the air gets busy. So the bowyer's shop becomes a factory before war season. Staves seasoning on racks, bellies of yew coaxed into curve, horn slivers for knocks. The Fletcher matches shafts to heads, needled bodkins for punching mail, broadheads for horses, fireheads waiting in sand buckets like sleeping wasps. Barrels of arrows stand by the gatehouse and the tower stairs, so nobody is sprinting across the yard just to reload a parapet. Ropes get inspected and coiled like they're treasure, because they are. Spare quivers hang where hands will need them, not where a tidy mind thinks they look nice. Armor is maintenance with attitude. Links of mail get peened shut anew. Rivets replaced. Leather straps conditioned with fat so they don't betray you by snapping in rain. Helmets get a polish that doubles as rust control. Padded gambesons dry on frames near the kitchen heat, a smell equidistant between worn and war. A good armourer is both surgeon and therapist. He knows which soldier ignores a crack in a vambrace until someone yells at him, and which one will bring a gauntlet back because the lining felt different. Horses make their own subculture. The stables are warm, noisy, rank in a way that says power lives here. Destria's war horses get the good oats and careful hands. Palfreys for messages and patrols get the miles. Farriers make shoes that grip mud or bite ice. Grooms brush out blankets of dust and whisper secrets to creatures that understand tone better than language. A small forge nearby keeps shoe nails ready, and buckets of sand sit handy because fire and hay are old enemies. Dogs have jobs. 2 lean curs with bright eyes for night patrols, bigger beasts for intimidation and tracking. Their handlers whistle in patterns that mean heal, search, speak. On some nights, the first alarm is a low growl. Nobody but the handler hears. And then the horn's up, and the yard is busy before anyone knows why they were awake. Boredom is the real siege most days, so the constable fights it with order. Guard rosters shuffle men through posts before eyes glaze. Rotations are 4 hours long enough to matter, short enough that cold doesn't write itself into joints. Night watches carry weighted rods in the offhand to keep the body awake. Gate guards trade jokes with the clerk who will absolutely write you up if your halberd isn't clean. Dice are constant and banned and constant again. The chaplain preaches moderation. The steward confiscates contraband. Someone mutters that a little vice is cheaper than replacing morale. Justice exists because groups do dumb things. Penalties have a performance aspect. Clean the latrine trench for a week. Wear your mail inside out for a day if you slept on watch. Stand at the gate and answer visitors' questions politely while wearing a sign that says, "I forgot my sword." The point isn't cruelty, it's memory. Nobody forgets the smell of a punishment shift. When trouble looms tracks in the fields, a beacon from a friendly hill, the castle changes gear with satisfying clicks. The yard clears. Livestock crowd into the inner bailey. Cartloads of hay shift to where they won't feed a fire under the wall. The drawbridge crew limbers at the winch. The gatehouse room above the passage stocks amphorae for dropping, racks for quarrels, jars of sand, water, oil. Cauldrons wake on their hooks like dragons stretching. Runners lace belts, tuck in tunics, and rehearse routes with their eyes closed. Signals matter twice as much under pressure. The horn calls stretch into phrases. A trumpet at the west tower plays the notes for "Shut the postern." A bell by the chapel rings the slow, heavy peal that means all hands. Flags sprout on the keep with colours the garrison has drilled until they're reflex. Down in the hall, the steward produces the ration ledger and turns into a metronome. Bread, cheese, ale hands out, move on. The chaplain takes confession near the side door with a speed that would scandalize theologians and comfort soldiers. Then the pace breaks into 2 worlds, hot and cold. On the parapet it's hot bowstrings, breath, shouted distances, the whip crack of a ballista if you're lucky enough to have one, the strange silence just before a thrown stone lands somewhere it shouldn't. Below, in the belly of the keep and the gatehouse rooms, it's cold counting, fetching, bracing props, winding ropes, holding doors. The garrison learns to be 2 tempos at once. In siege, days become recipes. Morning. Check for saps tunnels by listening rods pressed to stone. Send a countermine crew if the earth whispers. Midday. Rotate archers. Force everyone to drink water even if they swear they're fine. Afternoon. Inspect rope. Inspect axles on the treadwheel crane. Inspect each other's faces for that too bright light that means someone's been on the line too long. Night. Double the posts, shorten the silence, send a sortie if the enemy sleeps rude. A small gate opens like a secret. 30 men flow out like water into a low spot. Knives, kiss ropes and stakes. And then they're back through the postern before full moonlight can say their names. Morale is the resource no ledger can tally exactly. It's warmed by small mercies. A better cut of meat to the night watch. A clean pair of socks for the fellow who's been on the wall for 12 hours. A song in the hall that everyone pretends not to sing along with. It's protected by fairness. The Lord takes ration cuts when the soldiers do. The officer who dodges the rule becomes a story told with sharp edges. And it's shaped by ritual. Prayer before a sally, every man touching the gate lintel as he passes under for luck, a shared coin that buys victory and gets tucked into the portcullis slot before the fight. By the time the enemy decides the castle is a porcupine not worth hugging, the garrison's reward is not glory, but continuity. The walls still stand, the ledger still adds, the well still lifts, the horn still knows what to say. That continuity is the point. A castle survives by being boring most days, and terrifying on the few that matter. And when the worst passes, all those skills don't pack up and leave. They settle back into rhythm, repairing, replacing, drilling, because the next test isn't an if, it's a when. You can't talk about castles without talking about the slow, ugly duet they sang with siege engines. For every wall a mason raised, somewhere a carpenter sharpened a saw and asked, "All right, how do we knock that down?" Attackers didn't just turn up, shout, and hope. They arrived with a travelling circus of wood, rope, iron, and arithmetic machines that turned distance into danger and patience into pressure. Start at ground level. The oldest script: ladders and rams. Ladders are optimism with rungs cheap, fast, terrifying. Under arrow rain, men run them up, jam their tops into crenels, and try to become the first head over a parapet where 10 defenders are already waiting to discuss alternative life choices. Defenders counter with poles to shove ladders off, hooks to yank, and rocks to introduce the ladder team to gravity. It's crude, but on a foggy morning with surprise on your side, ladders can decide a war before the enemy's breakfast cools. Battering rams are teamwork taught by percussion. Imagine a ship's mast, sheathed in iron, slung in a wooden gallery on chains, and rocked by a score of men until it hammers the same spot, again and again, like a heartbeat that grew fists. The ram's gallery carries a roof rawhide soaked, earth-layered, to shrug off fire. Defenders reply with downward attention. Stones, hot sand, jars of water to swell the timber and deaden its bounce, and if they're particularly wired for enthusiasm, dropping a hooked beam through a murder hole to catch the ram's head mid-swing and hold it like a misbehaving dog until archers on the wall can tidy the crew below. Then the machines with reach arrive. Mangonel's torsion catapults use twisted ropes of hair or sinew as angry muscles. They fling fist-sized stones, jars, or worse. Counterweight trebuchets are the aristocrats of throwing things. A giant seesaw with a heavy box on one end and a sling on the other. Lodestone, pull down, release, and the counterweight's fall whips the sling in a long, smooth arc that teaches walls about regret. A good crew can drop a 200-pound stone into the same square yard of curtain again and again. Rhythm as strategy, thud. Adjust, thud until a joint opens. Then a seam, then a memory. The engineers, more mathematicians than warriors, squint at angles, tweak sling length, and argue about wind like sailors. Defenders fight the physics with their own, build banks of earth against the inner face of the threatened wall to absorb blows, shore up with timbers, hang thick woolen or rawhide screens to deaden missile impact, cut a relieving arch behind the injured area, so if stone fails, the arch still holds a path. They also reply in kind. A castle that stockpiled a small trebuchet on the lawn, the little brother, can lob back at siege works, smashing scaffolds and reminding the enemy that gravity doesn't sign exclusive contracts. Siege towers are audacity on wheels. Multi-story wooden barns plated with wet hides, rolled toward the wall over fascines bundles of sticks dumped into ditches to make faux ground. Archers and crossbowmen nest in the upper decks, trying to clear the parapet. A drop bridge at the top slams onto the wall walk to spill men across like a harrowing tide. The defense starts early. Night sorties burn the tower before it grows teeth. Sappers dig pits to swallow its wheels. Archers scythe the crews with quarrels, while firepots test whether the hides were soaked enough. Up close, the tower is both terror and target, and every yard it crawls is bought with kindling. Mining is the quiet war below the loud one. Sappers tunnel toward the base of a wall, shore the gallery with timber, then set a fire beneath the foundations. When the props burn through, the roof collapses, the tunnel buckles, and the wall above loses its spine, slumping into a jagged smile. Attackers scramble to turn into an entrance. Countermines start from inside the castle. Defenders listen with their cheeks pressed to rods, touching the stone feeling for the quiver of picks and dig to intersect, fighting in cramped earth by the light of smoking lamps. It's intimate, brutal, and decides more sieges than paintings of heroic ladders would have you think. Not every missile is about fracture. Some are about filth and fear. Disease rides sieges like an uninvited general. Attackers huddle in camps where latrines are afterthoughts. Defenders crowd behind walls where one well matters more than prayer. A dead animal flung over the wall is not just cruelty. It's a biological tactic. Defenders counter with pits, lime, and the ruthless habit of moving the healthy away from the smell. The best steward in Europe can't turn a plague. He can, however, stop a dysentery outbreak from finishing what the enemy started. Between brutality, there's negotiation because math often wins where pride pretends to. Feudal levies don't last forever. Many armies are clocks with expiring springs as vassals fulfill their required weeks and go home to crops. Attackers count barrels and days. Defenders count candles and morale. Heralds walk between lines with flags that say, "Nobody shoots right now," and talk is a weapon. Surrender now and keep your lives, your horses, your precious tapestry, or hold 3 more weeks and we break the levy. They'll go home. Ransom and terms are professional art forms. A smart constable knows when a doomed defense will buy a king time elsewhere, and when stubbornness just turns his men into a story told by others. Espionage does its quiet work. Bribery finds gatekeepers who like silver better than their oaths. A baker's cart for the Lord's table can carry more than bread. A forged seal opens a postern once before anyone realizes the wax is wrong. Defenders watch for patterns who always comes at dawn, which muleteer never looks up, which guard started drinking better ale. An intercepted letter weighs more than a stone. One traitor can out, throw a trebuchet. Fire is the old god everyone fears. Pitch, tar and brushwood turn siege engines into bonfires. Arrows wrapped with tow and dipped in oil-stitched lines of flame across mantlets. Defenders keep buckets of water and sand ready on the wall like hourglasses you hope not to turn. In wind, fire forgets its orders and runs where it pleases, so both sides learn to read smoke as if it's writing in a language they'll be tested on. Weather gets a vote. Rain turns ramps to soap and bowstrings to twine that sulks. Frost makes ladders treacherous for the wrong side and perfect for the right. Summer sun exhausts crews on the treadwheel crane until the foreman starts forcing water breaks like a tyrant with mercy. A well-timed storm has saved more walls than oratory ever did. A hot, still afternoon has dulled more attacks than any sermon about valor. Economics sits behind every decision like a stern accountant. Sieges are ruinously expensive for attackers. Wood, iron, food, wages, bribes, time, especially time. For defenders, the cost is inopportunity and depletion. Stores eaten, roofs cracked by stones, fields unworked, allies testing their patience and your reputation. That's why so many sieges end not with a dramatic breach, but with a negotiated exit. Garrison marches out with banners, weapons sheathed, the Lord hands over keys and a hostage for terms, and the victors take possession of a place they must now repair and hold. War is theatre. Peace is paperwork with scars. Occasionally, there's spectacle. A master-built trebuchet, some get names like Warwolf, because engineers are poets when funded throws a stone so perfectly that the wall catalogues the moment in a single aching sigh and then opens like a book. Or a sally from the postern catches sappers in their tunnel mouth, collapses the gallery and buys another month. Or a simple miracle of morale happens. A garrison sings on the wall at sunset while the enemy cooks their thin stew, and everyone understands suddenly that stubbornness is a resource too. And sometimes the new thing arrives. A cannon, squat and smoky, iron mouth yawning. Early guns are unreliable, expensive, prone to tantrums, but when they behave, they bruise stone faster than any trebuchet can. The wall engineered to shrug off stones thrown in arcs does not love stones thrown in lines. Corners chip, faces sprawl, and suddenly the castle is learning a new grammar, where height is less useful than thickness angled for ricochet, and earth absorbs insult better than prideful ashlar. That revolution is coming, but in our present chapter, it's still a rumour wrapped in noise, testing itself on unlucky towers, while carpenters glance at each other and wonder how to make walls that don't mind thunder. Through it all, the garrison lives by routine. Count arrows, cut more fletchings, mend bowstrings, shore the inner bank behind the scarred wall, move the women and children to the keep's safest chambers, rotate watches, so nobody stares so long at the horizon that they start seeing mercy where there is only movement. The steward's ledger grows greasy at the corners. The chaplain's hands smell of smoke. The smith's anvil sings until midnight. A siege isn't one battle. It's 1,000 small tasks done well enough that a big disaster never quite happens. When the banners finally change on the gate or don't, the first job is the same either way. Repair. Put back what the enemy tried to erase. Mortar new courses into old scars. Rehang the portcullis. Rebuild the hoarding brackets. Refill the grain bins. Bless the well. And thank whatever saints watch over rope. Which is where we go next. What it takes to patch a castle back together, settle the score with the earth for what you asked of it, and turn a place of exhaustion back into a place of order, because even victory leaves teeth marks, and stone remembers everything. When a siege ends, the banners either stay or they don't, but the work looks remarkably similar in both cases. Fix everything the last few months tried to unteach. Victory is the more cheerful version of exhaustion, but stone doesn't care about your mood. It only cares about weight, weather, and whether you respect the quiet rules it laid down long before kings learned the word mine. First comes the walk through and audit in boots. The constable, the master mason, the carpenter, the smith, the steward, and the clerk with the inexhaustible quill do a lap of truth. They tap stone with hammers and listen for the sour note that means a hidden void. They run fingers along mortar joints and feel where frost chewed or heat sulked. They lean into parapets, watch for telltale give, note every arrow loop that chips at the edges, every merlon that took one insult too many. The clerk writes until his knuckles cramp. The list will feed the next month like grain. Priority triage is simple. Make the gates safe, the walls honest, the water clean, and the roof weather-tight. Gatehouse first. If the portcullis teeth bind in their grooves, or the windlass rattles like a bag of bones, you don't have a gate, you have a suggestion. So the smith and carpenter caught each other's skills. New oak for rails, new pins in the chain, new iron strap where an eager ram chewed through old plate. The drawbridge gets its hinges rehung and its decking replanked. Someone sands the tread so horses won't ice skate on the first wet morning. The clerk checks off each change, then writes the total cost with a sigh that sounds like arithmetic. On the walls, the mason's craft speaks softly but decisively. Scars from stones thrown by trebuchets get packed with new ashlar on the face and hungry rubble in the core. Through stones, those long heroes are replaced where they snapped. If a section bulged, it gets unpicked course by course, until the shape remembers its lesson and stands square again. Inside the threatened curtain, carpenters brace with great A-frames, temporary wooden ribs set against the inner face while mortar cures. They look like a forest leaning on the wall, patient as saints. Water is the sneakiest saboteur. Freeze-thaw cycles will pry joints apart better than any enemy if you let them, so masons recut drip courses and renew lead flashings where roofs kiss stone. Weep holes in the parapet get cleared of the pebbles and mystery trash a siege accumulates. Cisterns are purged and replastered with waterproof lime render. The well curb gets inspected for hairline cracks. And the bucket ropes are retired before they choose a dramatic moment to fail. The roof matters more than pride admits. A wet hall is despair wearing a tarp. Carpenters climb under the eaves to test rafters with awls sound wood fights back. Rot takes the blade in like a bad secret. Rotten sections get scarf joints, those elegant diagonal splices that knit old and new so cleanly you'd swear the beam never knew trouble. Shingles or tiles are relayed in patient courses, and the thatcher, if the outer bailey uses thatch, puts his weather eye to work, tying down ridges with hazel spars so a winter gale doesn't turn the yard into a very rustic bird's nest. Ironwork is a litany of little salvations. Hinges that squeal are hinges that tear themselves to pieces. The smith rebushes gudgeons, re-rivets mail links, welds a crack in the treadwheel's axle before it whispers itself into a shout. He tempers, chisels, sharpens the mason's toothed tools, draws nails by the hundredweight, and makes clamps those humble iron dogs that keep stones honest until the mortar decides it can work unsupervised. In the yard, a young apprentice learns to strike while the smith holds, and the rhythm of hammer on anvil sounds like confidence finding its steps. Timber yards look like busy chessboards. New scaffolding poles are stacked and sorted by length. Ropes are coiled and dusted with chalk. Any stiffening hemp replaced before it tattles under load. The ropery walks long and straight again. Fibres spun into strands. Strands into hawser. The twist building a stored energy that cranes will spend one careful lift at a time. Then there's the part most visitors never see. the accounting. Stone remembers everything, and so does the ledger. Repairs have a cost measured in coin, labour days, and favours. The steward sends riders to nearby manors for labour quotas. Feudal obligations sharpen into cartloads and calices. The reeve in the village negotiates which fields can spare men without starving their harvest. The lord balances generosity against expectation. Too much squeeze, and loyalty curdles. Too much leniency, and the roof leaks for another season while your neighbour quietly upgrades his barbican. Politics is mortar you can't buy by the cart. Speaking of politics, victory changes conversations. So does loss. If you repelled an enemy, your banner buys you time to raise a new tax, call it extraordinary, to claim you defended the realm, and to ask the king for a forest's worth of timber rights, since you spent yours shoring up the north wall. If you yielded and marched out with terms, your next months are diplomacy, secure the garrison's pay, find billets, remind allies you fell with honour, not incompetence, and convince the new occupants that you would, in an emergency, still be the most reliable professional they know. And always, a quiet revolution taps at the door. Thunder. Early guns, bombards, and handguns are grumpy, smoky miracles that made carpenters rethink geometry. Your beautiful sheer wall that shrugged at trebuchet arcs doesn't shrug at blunt, repeated blows to the same square foot. Spalling chips faces. Corners chunk away like stale bread. The mason with the longest memory starts to mutter about lower profiles, thicker bases, angled bastions that throw shots aside, and big, fat banks of earth that eat iron's tantrums without cracking. You won't see a full star fort here yet, but you might notice a bulwark at the gatehouse, a thicker, squatter tower with fewer pretty lines and more stubborn ones, and an earthen rampart outside the curtain that looks like a farmer's mistake, until it doesn't budge under bombardment. Maintenance becomes a calendar. Spring, clear ditches and moats, cut back brush that gives sappers concealment, repair the causeway, reseat the bridge pins. Summer, repoint mortar in shaded faces that stay damp, tar the hoarding brackets, audit arrow stock, and set the fletchers sweating. Autumn, fill stores, rotate grain, cull herds, make sure the well pulley doesn't cry. Winter, indoor work, mend harness and gambesons, carve new pegs and wedges, patch the chapel roof over the apse, oil every hinge like it's a promise. The castle's domestic heartbeat candles, wood, water goes right on, humming under the louder drum of soldiers' drills. Repair season is also training season. New masons learn to read the wall like a pulse. This joint is tired. This quoin is proud. This putlog hole will take a plug tomorrow. Carpenters teach scarf joints to lads who thought a beam was just a beam. The garrison practices bucket lines in the courtyard because the surest fire engine is still people plus water plus yelling. A day is set aside for a full lockdown drill. Raise the bridge in a hurry, drop the portcullis, haul stones to the parapets, shift barrels to protect the gate doors. It feels theatrical until you shave minutes off last year's time and everyone quietly stands taller. Even the chapel gets its maintenance. Painted plaster flaking under damp is repainted. The priest's roof stoppered. The tiny window leads reset so they don't rattle hymns off. Key. A garrison that prays together often works together better not from piety alone, but because ritual glues days into weeks. On a saint's day, the hall smells of something celebratory, and a carpenter gets an extra cut because he finished the gate braces ahead of schedule. Morale is the cheapest repair with the longest warranty. Outside the curtain, the village heals around you. Fields need reseeding where trenches ran. A hedger pulls the line straight where a siege engine crushed his carefully laid pleach. The miller's wheel gets a new paddled rim after stray stones turned it into modern art. The castle steward remembers who loaned carts in the dark week, and who tried to charge triple for onions. Debts are paid some in coin, some in permissions, some in the currency of looking the other way when a man takes an extra bundle of kindling from the outer wood. Power breathes in these trades. And, perhaps the most important repair of all, stories get told. In the hall at night, by a fire that's finally hot for pleasure instead of necessity, the garrison retells the siege in versions that heal. The archer who put a shaft through a siege tower's viewing slit becomes a figure with a nickname. The scullion who ran water until her hands bled gets a seat closer to the warmth. The mason who stood on a swinging scaffold to snap a clamp into place during the worst barrage gets his mark carved discreetly on a quoin where only other masons will notice and nod. This is not vanity. It's infrastructure you can't see. Cohesion. When the last scaffold comes down and the final lime wash dries pale against the sky, you step back and see a familiar silhouette made slightly new. The wall line is truer than it was in the bleakest week. The gatehouse breathes easier. The keep's roof throws a sharper shadow at noon, and the ditch freshly scoured reflects the sky with an unbothered calm that makes travellers think you were never worried. That illusion is part of the job. So you close the ledger on repairs and open it on readiness. The castle returns to its default state, boring on purpose, busy under the surface, a daily accumulation of small decisions that make a future possible. You drill, you mend, you harvest, you sing, and you teach the apprentices where to put their hands so the wall can feel them and decide to stay. Because that's the truth the stones teach you every season. No castle is finished. It's either decaying or maintained, endangered or prepared. And the difference between those fates lives in the unglamorous middle, the part where you lift, check, scrape, tighten, replace, and keep the water and the fire and the people pointed the right way. A fortress keeps danger out, but it also pulls a world in. Once the walls are mended and the garrison drills more than it fights, the castle settles into its other full-time job, being the center of gravity for everything within a day's walk. Stone is security, but it's also administration, markets, justice, ritual, theatre. If you want to see how power actually lives, don't watch the battlements. Follow the paperwork, the bread and the bells. Start at the gate on a fair morning. The drawbridge is down, the portcullis raised, and the gatehouse clerk has his table out like a judge at a produce contest. Carts roll in grain, wool bales, hides, barrels, iron bars, baskets of eggs, a coop of geese who hate the whole idea of commerce. The clerk weighs, measures, and collects tolls. Not extortion, at least, not as he'll explain it. The fee keeps the road safe, the bridge sound, the market clean, the thieves endangered. He stamps tallies, takes a small cut, and builds the ledger that lets the steward predict winter's mood. Beyond the gate, the outer bailey becomes a marketplace, stalls under awnings, a smell map that runs from bread to fish to tanned leather to sugar almonds that crack between your teeth like fireworks. Minstrels test a verse about last year's siege and decide it needs fewer details and more rhymes. A tinker sharpens knives for pennies. A cloth seller opens a chest like a treasure map and holds up dyed wool that glows under a grey sky. In 5 minutes, you know more about the region's economy than a month of dull charters could tell you what grows, what's scarce, what ambitions the villagers have stitched into their sleeves. The castle doesn't just tax this, it organises it. The lord or lady grants a charter for a weekly market or an annual fair, with rights spelled out like a recipe, where stalls stand, who gets first choice of positions, what counts as honest measure. A fair court sits right on the green, settling disputes before anger can grow teeth. If someone tries short measure tricks with their grain scoop, the bailiff seizes the false bushel and hangs it on the market cross as a confession in wood. Public shaming beats long trials when time is money and money is lunch. Shift to justice proper, quieter, heavier. The great hall becomes a courtroom after breakfast. Benches scrape, the high seat fills, and the reeve calls cases. It's not grand law every day. It's fences trampled by pigs, debts unpaid since Michaelmas, a brawl involving 2 cousins and a misunderstanding about a borrowed spade. The steward knows who lies. The chaplain knows who regrets. The constable knows who's dangerous. Together they form a memory palace sharper than parchment. Punishments aim at repair more than revenge. Restitution, a day in the stocks for public reminder. The seasonal service owed being called in early. Real violence raids, arson, maiming gets the lord's full steel attention, and the dungeon's cool hospitality. Law blends with ritual. On certain feast days, the lord performs touches of mercy, remitting a small fine here, forgiving a toll there. It's good politics and better theatre. The people leave with stories. She spared old Watt's fee because his cow calved late. He gave timber for the mill wheel after the flood. Those stories do a kind of work you can't hire. They recruit hearts to the same team as the swords. Feudal obligations run like ropes through all of this. Tenants owe days of labour, repairing ditches, carting stone, harvesting hay for the garrison horses. In return, they receive protection not just from raiders, but from the petty tyrannies of chance. When a roof burns, The carpenter from the castle sends a crew to lift new rafters. When wolves worry the lambs, the marshal dispatches riders. When a widow can't plough, the reeve organises a boon day. Neighbours yoke their oxen and make a field ready in an afternoon while the kitchen sends stew and the chapel rings thanks. Cynical? Sure. But also culture. The way a place remembers itself as worth defending. The economy under the roof is its own machine. The steward's table in the undercroft is spread with wax tablets and tallies. He is the quiet general of peace. Winter stores rotate. Cellarers compare casks. The baker keeps a ferment alive like a semi-domesticated pet and times the loaves to the garrison schedule. The brewhouse bubbles small beer for daily thirst, stronger ale for feast and payday. Salt is currency with patience. Pepper is a rumour with a price. Honey is summer saved in a jar. When a caravan does bring luxuries, spices, silk, a fine blade, a book everyone crowds to see what the wider world currently calls impressive. Even those who won't buy are buying into the idea that here, at this stone nerve centre, the world stops long enough to show itself. Craft and service niche roles bloom in the castle's orbit. The falconer, half magician, half veterinarian, trains hawks that turn the Lord's afternoon into a skyborne ballet. The herald keeps the grammar of colours and beasts straight, so banners say "us" with confidence from a mile away. The huntsman manages deer like a banker, manages ledgers, calculating what a forest can spare without going hungry next year. The chaplain writes letters that smell faintly of wax and humility, sending news to monasteries and courts. He also hears confessions and knows which soldier is one bad day from disaster. The midwife's status may not show on parchment, but when she walks through the gate with her bag, even the guard on duty nods like a squire to a knight. Pageantry isn't waste, it's infrastructure for loyalty. When the Lord hosts a feast, the castle becomes a theatre with edible props. Hall hangings are aired and rehung. Silver emerges from chests. The minstrels rehearse a lay about ancestors that will be only slightly improved by strategic exaggeration. Guests process through the gate to Horncall's banner. Retinue. Gifts carried in. The steward seats people like a chess master. Proximity is policy. The kitchen performs miracles of timing. So the first platter arrives exactly when the hall's hunger turns from interesting to impolite. Between courses, gifts are given hawks, a bolt of cloth, a deed for a strip of woodland, and oaths are renewed with a hand over steel. You could call it conspicuous consumption, but look at what it buys. A network tuned to your frequency. Men who will ride when summoned because you fed their pride along with their bellies. Diplomacy lives in guest chambers, and on the wall walk at twilight. Envoys arrive with smiles and small lies. The constable gives them a tour that, accidentally, includes the well-stocked arrow barrels and the drawbridge's quick lift. The chaplain talks books with the abbey's man and places an order for a psalter. The lady of the castle negotiates marriages like a strategist sets ambushes kindly, patiently, with a memory for who promised what in last year's letters. When truce years come, the castle hosts hunts that are really summits with dogs. When tensions rise, it offers a neutral hall where no one's sword is out but everyone's eyes are up. Education creeps along the beams too. Pages learn in the margins of errands. To read a ledger, to hold a tray straight, to ride without looking at their hands, to stand still while a knight corrects an elbow. Squires take the next layer, arming a man in the right order, packing for a winter ride, mending a strap without waiting to be asked. The armourer teaches file strokes. The fletcher teaches feathering. The mason lets a boy set one stone on a shed and corrects it with infinite patience, because a pride properly born can live a lifetime. Religion's calendar beats like a second heart. Bell for prime, bell for vespers. On feast days, the hall's appetite shifts from meat to meaning. The priest's homily references the siege with a parable about walls and virtues. Men roll their eyes and then straighten their backs because they want it to be true. Processions thread the ward with candles. A relic visits and the whole region shows up with hope in their hands. The poorest eat better on a saint's day than they do the week after, and nobody pretends that isn't the point. The castle shapes the landscape, and the landscape answers back. Roads converge on its gate. Inns sprout like helpful mushrooms along those roads. Mills spin where the Lord chartered them. Fish weirs on the river grow under licenses, not luck. In return, the castle owes stewardship. Bridges repaired before floods unhitch them. Woods managed so deer don't strip the saplings bare. meadows left to breathe after haying. When a storm rips tiles from the chapel, the carpenter's crew that climbs the roof is also climbing a promise. All this isn't quaint garnish on warfare. It's the reason the warfare matters. A castle that can hold a fair, judge a quarrel, repair a wheel, and host a feast is a magnet that turns random people into a community with coordinates. It teaches habits, how to queue at the gate, how to speak to the steward, how to bring a grievance without bringing a knife. And those habits mean that when the horn calls, the same people form bucket lines instead of panic lines. Listen at night when the ward quiets. Somewhere a dog thumps its tail against wood. A sentry shifts weight and the chain links of his mail whisper like rain on thatch. The kitchen's last fire clicks as it relaxes into coals. A clerk yawns over a letter that will ride out at dawn. The wind touches a banner and tells it a story it will never repeat. This is power on idle. Not splendor for its own sake, but systems that sleep with one eye open. Of course, the world beyond the walls keeps changing its questions. Trade routes move. Kings consolidate power. The idea of what makes a strong place starts to tilt from tall stone to low-angled earth. Gunpowder's rumor becomes practice, then policy. You can feel it at the edges of the day. A bombard on a distant field clearing its throat. A mason suggesting a lower profile for the new tower, and not being laughed out of the yard. The castle will adapt or become a romantic ruin faster than bards can write metaphors. But before we face thunder and the slow pivot from fortress to residence, from battlement to balcony, take the long view from the parapet and see the web below. That web, the markets, the courts, the kitchens, the chapels, the drills, the fairs, is the castle's real footprint. Stone casts a shadow, institutions cast a future. Stand on the parapet and listen. Beneath the wind and the geese and the distant hammer from the smithy, there's a new sound on the horizon. Thunder that doesn't wait for clouds. Gunpowder stops being a rumor and starts writing in stone. The castle you've built to shrug off arcs of rock now has to learn how to live with straight-line punches of iron. And change, like a siege, is patient but relentless. Early on, guns are more theatre than certainty. Bombards are monstrous tubes of wrought iron staves, hooped like barrels, dragged by oxen with the moral support of every curse a teamster knows. They belch smoke, spit fire, and sometimes explode in ways that make bystanders reconsider their life goals. But when they behave, when powder grain is right, when the wind doesn't sulk, when the crew times the tamp and the touch hole, they do something trebuchets can't. They concentrate insult on one handspan of wall, until even the best ashlar starts to flake like pastry. A castle designed to deflect and diffuse suddenly learns the meaning of spall shards scything off the interior face with the cruelty of shrapnel. The first answer isn't poetry. It's physics. Lower the silhouette. Thicken the base. Soften the angles the way you soften a fall, with a cushion. Earth humble, heavy, obedient becomes fashionable. An earthen rampart in front of a stone curtain eats cannonballs and asks for another, where pure masonry would chip and complain. Builders throw up talus sloping footings that take a shot and hand it to gravity, not to cracks. Towers, once proud and round as lighthouses, squat and thicken, shoulders hunched, their parapets widened into platforms that can host guns of their own. Loopholes evolve into embrasures for cannon, splayed wide inside to let smoke out and recoil breathe. The gatehouse, once the castle's swagger, becomes a liability if it sits proud beyond the line of fire. So the smart places wrap it in a bulb of earth, a bulwark, an early bastion, really that denies a clean shot at the doors and gives defenders angles to return fire along the ditch. The ditch itself changes character. Wider, with scarp and counterscarp faced in masonry to stop sudden slumps under bombardment. You start hearing new words. Flanking, enfilade, ricochet, the geometry of bullets and balls learning to dance with angles. As guns standardize and founders get better at making barrels that don't sulk, the whole art tilts toward a style you could call listening to lead. On the continent, that listening becomes an academy. Angled bastions projecting from low curtains, each bastion covering its neighbor with crossed fields of fire. The silhouette is no longer a comb of merlons against the sky. It's a flat, purposeful star when seen from above, a geometry of denial. The old keep king of height and drama feels theatrical now, and theatre is expensive under artillery observation. In some places it becomes a storehouse, a symbol, a dovecote for prestige. In others, It's dismantled because a landmark is also a target. But change comes with budgets and egos attached. Not every lord can afford to turn a proud rock into a thoughtful earthwork with fashionable angles. Many castles become hybrids, medieval at the core, modern at the edges. A thickened gate, a new gun platform on the tower where the chapel bell once hung, a ditch widened and given crisp stone cheeks. The old wall walk remains, a sentimental high road, used on feast days and sunny inspections, while the real work gets done on a low platform where a culverin huffs and a gunner with powder-streaked hands talks about trajectories like a poet with numbers. The garrison learns new habits. Powder is a prima donna. It wants to be kept dry, wants careful measures, wants sparks treated like snakes. Soldiers become part firefighters, part chemists. Barrels get stored in cool, aired vaults. Candles are banished, water stands ready for accidents, sand stands ready for worse. A gun crew's drill is choreography with risks. Swab to kill embers, worm to clear debris, load powder, wad, ball, tamp, run out the carriage, aim by eye and feel, touch, hole primed, linstock to kiss the vent boom, and recoil, and a scramble to chock the wheels before the piece decides to roll into a wall. Between shots, lungs blacken and ears learn a new ringing they'll never quite forget. And yet, as fortification evolves, another parallel story unfolds inside the walls. Comfort gets ideas. If height no longer equals safety, then maybe height can equal views. If arrow loops surrender to gun ports in the outer works, the inner buildings can open their eyes wider. Windows grow, first in the solar, then in halls that dare to be airy. Glass becomes less of a fragile luxury and more of a statement. This place is not just about surviving winter, it's about enjoying light. Tapestries still warm walls, but now plaster grows smoother, paint travels farther, and ceilings flirt with beams cut for beauty instead of only for brawn. Kitchens modernize in their medieval way. More iron grates, better draft in the chimneys, perhaps even a proper pastry room if the lady has opinions about sugar. The wardrobe expands into something like a logistics office for fabrics and furnishings. The steward tracks not just oats and arrows but upholstery and imported spices. A niche craft takes hold. Artisans for comfort. Glaziers with finer lead cames, joiners who can make panels that slide instead of swing, painters who do saints on Tuesday and floral borders on Thursday. The castle leans toward being a house that knows how to fight instead of a weapon that tolerates housework. Meanwhile, power reorganizes above the parapets. Kings with standing armies, paid in coin instead of harvested loyalty, prefer centralized artillery parks to a patchwork quilt of barons perched on rock islands. Royal fortresses designed from scratch for powder sprout on frontiers and ports, while inland castles age into administrative centers, prisons, or polite fossils. The hall still hosts law, but the laws now arrive bound and stamped from a chancellery in the capital. A courier in a tidy livery can outrank the mood of 100 men with spears simply by producing a royal seal and a piece of parchment that says, "Do this." In some places, the castle dissolves gracefully into a country house with manners. The moat becomes a mirror for gardens. The barbican melts into a polite carriage approach where peacocks audition for compliments. The old keep becomes a strange, romantic garden feature. The hall learns to set tables for music more often than for musters. Architects chase symmetry. Bedrooms acquire fireplaces that don't bite with smoke. A ballroom slides into the ground plan where once a mustering yard lived. Poetry and estate management start sharing the same notebook. In other places, history is less kind. A war that favors artillery decides a hilltop castle is a bad habit, and down go the walls slighted, the polite term so they can't shelter rebellion next season. Villagers cart away dressed stone to rebuild a church tower or line a bridge. The gatehouse becomes a barn because its arch is a perfect mouth for wagons. Sheep sun themselves on the grass that once took hoofbeats to war. A ruin is born, picturesque, melancholically alive, teaching children to climb and poets to describe. But even as form changes, function leaves fingerprints that never fade. The market crosses remain where charters once, their iron hooks now holding bunting. Roads still converge on old gates, even when the gate is a memory. The mill races dug by castle stewards keep turning wheels for new trades. Wool to cloth, grain to flour, water to electricity if someone is clever in a later age. The habit of gathering at a place for judgment and celebration persists. Maybe now it's a town hall instead of a great hall, a fairground instead of an outer bailey, but the pulse is recognizable. Stone trained a landscape to think in rhythms. Those rhythms are stubborn. And people, always people, keep translating stone into stories that outlive accuracy. The secret tunnel becomes longer with each retelling, until it allegedly reaches 3 counties away. The ghost in the chapel adds new reasons to haunt as centuries accumulate. A betrayed lover in one era, a wronged steward in another, a nameless soldier in ours. A carved mason's mark turns into a family crest in local imagination, while the real crest gathers dust on a page in an archive that few visit and fewer read. If you walk a surviving castle today, the earth-banked kind that learned gunpowder's grammar, you'll notice the perspective shift it teaches. Instead of looking up at high walls, you look down into trenches and out across angles. Defense becomes about sightlines and denial, about making attackers feel like every step is watched by someone they can't see. It's a subtler kind of intimidation, less theatrical, more mathematical. The hero piece isn't the soaring keep. It's the bastion whose geometry you felt in your stomach as you walked, even if you couldn't name it. Which is why, despite the thunder and the fashion for low silhouettes, I'm not ready to say the medieval castle dies. It molts. Some keep fighting by learning new shapes. Some retire into comfort and become the grandparents of great houses. Some give their bones to towns, bridges, and ballads. The DNA persists. Concentrate resources, project stability, gather people, create a centre of gravity where law and bread and courage meet. Whether topped by crenels or crowned by chimneys, that's the enduring idea. We've climbed a long way with this place, from hill choosing to foundation trenches, from windlass wheels to murder holes, from siegecraft to market courts, from stone to earth and back to light. There's one chapter left on our walk. What all of this labour and geometry, smoke and song adds up to when you step back far enough to see it not as architecture or warfare or economics, but as a human answer to a very old question. What does it mean to build something that holds, not just against enemies, but against time? Step far enough back and the castle stops being a pile of technical tricks, battered walls, stepped foundations, portcullises that thump like drum beats, and starts reading like an essay written in stone. Here is how a community keeps promises to its future. You can measure it in tonnage and tool marks, but the real weight is intention. Thousands of choices made by people who expected not to see the full payoff and did the work anyway. Think about the first hard truth the builders accepted. The ground decides. Before banners, before oaths, before anything dramatic, they listened to soil and bedrock. They dug until the earth told them it was ready. That's not just engineering. It's humility as a design principle. The second truth came right after. Nothing holds without a system. A wall is not a wall without a kiln to burn lime, a ropery to spin hawser, a woodland managed on a calendar, a forge that turns old iron into new purpose, and a ledger that keeps the winter honest. Castles are the anti-mirage. They only appear inevitable because 1,000 unglamorous gears decide to keep turning. From that humility and those systems comes the third truth. Endurance is mostly maintenance. In stories, castles are born in a time-lapse, scaffolds peeling away, banners snapping, a horn sounding in glorious reverb. In life, they survive because someone cleaned the weep holes, fanned mortar in the heat so it didn't sulk, rebushed a hinge before it confessed failure in a storm, and taught an apprentice where to set a coin so the corner wouldn't wander in February. You can point at a keep and say, "Genius, go ahead. It deserves it," but the warranty is written by caretakers. There's a fourth truth you can feel in your shoulder when you heft an arrow barrel. Defense is a choreography, not a moment. A garrison that drills flags and horns and bucket lines isn't playing soldier. It's practicing consent, agreeing, over and over, to be a single body when it matters. The glamour is lopsided. Archers on the parapet get remembered. The runners who kept them in arrows don't. But if the barrel doesn't arrive, the shot doesn't fly, the gap doesn't hold, the day doesn't end the way it should. Castles teach a very modern lesson for anyone building anything. Design theatre sells the first impression. Logistics guard the door. Then gunpowder arrives, and the metaphor grows up. All those verticals that felt like virtue height, pride, visibility, turn into liabilities under a new grammar of force. The places that weather the change best aren't the ones with the tallest towers, they're the ones with cultures built for revision. Lower the profile. Add earth to stone. Turn the gate from a boast into a question. That's not betrayal of heritage, it's fidelity to purpose. A castle that refuses to learn becomes a stage set for romance and ruin. A castle that learns becomes a different kind of strong place. Less photogenic, perhaps. More honest. But for all the thunder and geometry, the most durable work a castle does is social. You can see it in the market charter that outlives the mason who carved the first drip course. In the habit of gathering at a certain crossroads because 300 years ago a fair was declared there and it never stopped being common sense. In the bell schedule that kept brewhouse and bakery and guard rotation from stepping on each other's toes until the schedule itself became a kind of comfort. In the way the hall taught people to speak their grievance in public and accept a decision without drawing iron, the curtain wall may fall and rise again with fashion. The habit of order it taught keeps paying rent. I love the small artifacts that carry this truth in their bones. A mason's mark that looks like a star, nothing but 2 strokes on a coin, turns into a signature you can track across 3 counties and 20 winters. A notch on a stair that's a shade higher than its brothers, worn bright by boots of men who knew the trick and darker by those who didn't. A scorch pattern in a kitchen vault that says, "We roasted there," longer than any recipe survives. A ledge smoothed by the hands of sentries who leaned the same way during the same hour because the wind has argued the same point for centuries. Pull the camera closer, and it gets personal. The castle is a rehearsal space for human virtues that go out of fashion and then back in. Patience, craft, shared risk, accountability, the ability to keep showing up. The young Fletcher who learns to match feathers by curve today is the older sergeant who knows which man to rotate off the wall before he makes the mistake he'll live with forever. The steward who can add and subtract in lean years becomes the kind of memory a community can trust. The chaplain who blesses the well after a repair isn't performing magic. He's naming what everyone did together and turning it into a story that will behave. And yes, a castle can be cruel. It's also a machine for hierarchy, an amplifier for the will of the few. Some banners protect, some banners extort. But even there, the stone puts a leash on caprice. A lord who ignores the ledger will starve. A commander who sneers at maintenance will learn humility when the portcullis binds and won't lift. A ruler who harvests too much loyalty and returns too little repair will watch allies weather their own winters elsewhere. Architecture that works tends to discipline its owners. It doesn't make them good. It makes certain kinds of folly expensive. What does all of this add up to if you happen to be building in a different niche, say? Not with lime and oak and iron, but with ideas, videos, software, communities. More than you'd think. Site selection is the problem of choosing your hill. Know your audience and your platform. Let the terrain talk before you plant your flag. Foundations are your process. Routines you dig until they hit bedrock research. Outline, draft, review so wait later doesn't wobble. Walls are the shape of your promise. Consistent quality that sheds weather. Towers and gatehouses are your leverage and filters. The channels where attention enters. The rituals that turn visitors into participants. The keep is your values and your long-term stores. Why you'll stand when fashions hit you like trebuchets. Maintenance is the unsexy schedule that keeps the water clean and the lights on. And adaptation, the move from tall walls to angled bastions, is the hard choice to rework what used to be glorious, because reality changed and your purpose didn't. Most of all, remember the smallest reliable unit of endurance we saw in every chapter. A person doing a necessary task well, when nobody is watching. A rope maker rubbing hemp with tallow so tomorrow's lift doesn't fail. A boy swabbing a culverin between shots, because a spark doesn't care about yesterday's victory. A woman hauling water up a stair because thirst doesn't negotiate. A mason tapping a block until the note rings true because sound never learned to lie. Multiply that by years and you get walls. Multiply that by generations and you get a place. Walk the ward one last time at dusk. The parapet is a dark line against a pale sky. The ditch holds a ribbon of stubborn light. Somewhere a flag stirs and a hinge complains and a cook laughs at something that won't be funny in the morning. The keep's door is closed, and that tells you more than any speech. Tomorrow there will be drills, repairs, bread, judgments, gossip, and a dozen tiny courtesies that make none of it harder than it has to be. Tomorrow there may be thunder. Either way, the systems will wake up on time. That is what it means to build something that holds against enemies and time. Not perfection, not drama, but a practiced refusal to let neglect write your story. You choose the ground. You accept the limits. You stack the work true. You feed the machine with skill and kindness. You revise when the world learns a new weapon. You keep the water clean, the hinges quiet, the ledgers honest, and the people seen. And in the end, when strangers arrive and look up or look down, in later centuries, and feel that unnameable steadiness press against their ribs, they'll say, strong. What they're really feeling is a long, collective decision to be reliable. Stone just made it visible.